Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Series 9 of the Climate Pioneers Show. My name's Cherry, and I'm the founder of Above and Beyond Recruitment. We're a climate tech recruitment business working with startups and scale-ups to hire mission-driven talent and build their teams. And throughout the course of this series, we're speaking to founders and leaders from scaling climate businesses to hear all about their journey to date, the challenges that they've faced, and the lessons they've learned along the way. And if you're a founder yourself, perhaps slightly earlier on in the journey than some of our guests, we hope that these stories will inspire you, inform you, and help you feel a little bit less alone on the founder journey. And today, for episode 4, I am joined by Bill Yost, founder and CEO of Reclinker, formerly Cambridge Electric Cement. They are reimagining one of the most carbon-intensive materials on the planet, cement. Cement accounts for about 8% of all global emissions and is an incredibly challenging industry to decarbonise. Bill's company, Reclinker, is pioneering a novel approach that integrates electric processes to produce low-carbon cement. Founded in 2022 as a spin-out from the University of Cambridge, commercialising the concept developed by 3 academic co-founders. Over the last 3 years, they've collaborated with some major industry partners and have secured last year 2.25 million in seed funding led by Zero Carbon Capital. So I'm looking forward to hearing all about the journey so far. Bill, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure, absolutely. And tell me more about the founding and spin-out journey that Reclinker has been on and how you sort of joined the business and came to know those 3 academic co-founders.
No, thank you. So I would say this is my 3rd time as a founder. I was founder of 2 hardware startups in the other Cambridge in Massachusetts. And both, one was climate tech and exited. The other is not climate tech and has been on a growth journey for the last 14 years, continues to trundle on. Both have been successes to some degree, but pardon the baseball analogy, more of base hits than home runs.
Okay.
So I set the bar pretty high that if I was ever to be a founder again or to join another early stage company, I really wanted to see the potential for a really big impact. And I'd spent some time as a VC here in the UK and got to see quite a lot of early stage propositions, including a lot of climate tech propositions. And when I was introduced to the academic founding team, I was just blown away by both the team itself, but the proposition. A lot as a funder, a lot of the climate tech propositions I saw was a little bit heartbreaking because they had the potential to be impactful, but with such capital intensity that they were unfundable. And one of the unique aspects of Cambridge Electric Cement, or Reclinker now, is the ability to scale without having to build first-of-a-kind plants, without needing hundreds of millions to reach production and scale of producing cement. So that was compelling. Of course, the team, incredibly dynamic and clever, as you'd expect. And the additional ingredient when I was introduced to the 3 academics was a woman called Poppy Brewer, who had done her master's degree within that group, but then had gone into industry. She worked for Accenture for 10 years, concentrating on supply chains and sustainability. And at heart, what we're doing is very much a supply chain oriented. We have to move materials around and connect the dots within a circular economy. So her background and her energy, kind of added to the mix. And I thought, well, all the pieces of the puzzle here. It was tempting enough to sort of throw my hat in the ring and say, I know something about starting early stage companies. I've made a lot of the mistakes that I think I can help this team avoid. And the rest is history, I think.
Amazing. So that lovely combination of a team that you thought was massively inspiring, capable, competent, and you wanted to work with, an idea that was a true moonshot that could have huge impact, but ultimately something you could see was very fundable and scalable.
Absolutely, yeah. And those ingredients of having climate impact, as you mentioned, cement is a really, really significant contributor to global CO2 emissions, but it's also a huge economic market. The world market for cement is about $400 billion a year. So to have that combination of potential environmental benefit and economic incentives was really compelling.
Amazing. So talk us through a little bit more about the kind of scale of the problem you're solving. I kind of prefaced it there by saying, cement accounts for about 8%-ish of global emissions. Talk us through the scale of this problem, why it's such an intractable problem, and what Reclinker's solution is and why it's so unique.
Yeah, so at high level, the production of cement, is about 8% of global CO2 emissions. And that really comes down to two contributing factors. When the conventional way of making cement is taking limestone and clay and putting it into a massive kiln and heating that kiln to really high temperatures, so above 1400 degrees C. That's achieved by using fossil fuels. So that the fossil fuel emission element accounts for about 40% of cement CO2 footprint, but the other 60% comes from the reaction that takes place in the kiln itself. So limestone, when it's heated, it gives off CO2 and converts to lime, which is kind of the active ingredient in cement. So that calcination process, as it's known, is almost unavoidable in cement production. Where Reclinker's technology comes in, our clever CTO realized that if you start with material that's already been calcinated, so taking leftover cement or used cement, and if you heat that to sufficient temperature in the right conditions, it turns back into clinker, which is the material that comes out of cement kilns. So clinker's ground up, there's a little bit of gypsum added, and that's cement. So clinker isn't exactly cement, but it's they're related. So Cyril started from the premise of, well, if we could recycle calcinated material, where can you find a heat source that's electrically driven and operates at scale? And there's really only one process in the world that ticks those boxes, and that's the electric arc furnaces used for recycling steel. So steel furnaces operate at about 1640 C, so well above the 1450 for the cement reactions. And as it turns out, the steelmakers already put lime into the furnace to act as a flux. So what that does is it cleans the steel, takes impurities out, it protects the steel from oxygen, it adds a thermal barrier, lots of good things. But in doing those things, it's converted to a slag, which is a waste product. So it has some value. It goes into road building, sort of asphalt and base, but it's not particularly valuable. So informed listeners might know that blast furnace slags are used in cement mixes, but electric arc furnace slags don't have the right properties historically. We've shown that if you replace some or all of that lime with cement, it works wonderfully as a flux. It does all the jobs that conventional fluxes are meant to do, but brilliantly, instead of turning into a low-value byproduct, it turns into a high-value co-product. So we leverage the production capacity at steelmakers and co-produce steel and cement.
Amazing. And so you are, from a hardware perspective, utilizing furnaces that are already in production rather than needing to create a piece of hardware yourselves.
That's exactly right. So we look to some of our competitors who, one of the double-edged sword element of having a huge market like cement is that unless you can produce millions of tons of cement, it's not going to have an impact. Mm-hmm. So for our competitors who are trying to introduce entirely new cement production processes, they have to raise hundreds of millions of pounds or dollars or euros to create plants that can operate and make at scale. We can leverage pieces of kit that themselves cost hundreds of millions of pounds, but are in operation for another reason. That has its drawbacks. We need to convince steelmakers that what we're doing is worth taking a risk on, that they'll get some economic benefits from working with us. And that has been a long journey. But fortunately, we have found a very progressive, forward-looking steelmaker, formerly known as Celsa. They've just rebranded as Seven. They operate the UK's only commercial scale electric arc furnace, and that's in Cardiff. So they've been a brilliant partner where we've managed to do industrial scale trials and produce, hundreds of tons of material.
And ultimately, you're enabling them to increase their output, but also diversify their output, so they're earning another revenue stream almost from what they're producing.
Yeah, and so the economic model's been one of a little bit of a challenge. So we're effectively asking for access to their furnace to produce our material on top of their material. So we're not asking them to become a cement producer, but we are recognizing the value they bring. So there has to be, an economic incentive. So it has to be worth their while, but also a carbon incentive. And it's been rather eye-opening delving into the world of carbon credits and carbon apportionment. So making two materials in the same facility, it's surprisingly complex as to how you say, well, CO2 created here relates to that material or this material in different proportions. But the good news is, by co-producing steel and cement, there is a lot less carbon produced than if you were to produce them separately. So we can share that carbon benefit with the steel makers, and of course still provide a low carbon cement to the market.
Excellent. And can you demonstrate that the time that their machine is being used to create your product and not being used to create their own, they're not making too much of a loss in that time?
No, we're producing at the same time. So it's the material is kind of sat on top of the steel in one way of looking at it. So in the same furnace, the same production process. We have had challenges. We've recognized that we need to allow them to continue business as usual as much as is possible, and they have very strict operating windows. They have cycle times that are really well defined, and so our process has to fit within that cycle time. We recognize that changing any infrastructure is really challenging. So it's been a really interesting engineering challenge, but so far so good. I mean, we've done commercial scale trials, and we're claiming a world first of producing cementitious slags in an arc furnace. So yeah.
And your sort of calcinated product, where are you getting that from?
So there at scale, we see the potential to source demolition waste, and I should say one of the academic founders, a woman called Pippa Horton, is just she's a force of nature. She recognized when she was introduced to the proposition that to prove that it would ever work at scale would require kind of buy-in from every element of the supply chain. So she went out and knocked on a lot of doors and managed to pull together a consortium that has representatives across the supply chain, from demolition waste processors through to the kind of users and specifiers of concrete products. So the program was known as Cement to Zero. It was a £6.5 million funded project, with backing from Innovate UK. Celsa, or now Seven, was the major steel element of that. But Day Group are a demolition waste processor in South London. They process 5 million tons of demolition waste a year, and have been our partner in developing a supply chain for getting the cement out of crushed up concrete. So really, that's the source. When a multi-story car park is demolished, the steel reinforcement is already taken out and goes for recycling, but then the concrete is crushed, and industry today tries to get the stones and the sand in as clean a fashion as possible for reuse. And in doing that, what's left is kind of a fine powder, rich in calcium. It's the cement that's left over, and that's what we want. That's the feedstock for our process.
And how competitive is the market for that waste material? Because I would imagine as the circular industry increases, there is going to be increasing competition for these waste materials, I would imagine.
You're absolutely right. It's funny because there was a point in time when the demolition waste industry was trying to extract the highest quality sand and gravel, but it left behind, we call it recovered cement paste. It's not really a paste, it's a powder, but RCP for short. And what was left was RCP. There was no market for it. There was no identifiable use. And so it had to go to landfill, and the associated charges with that meant that the whole process was uneconomic. Fast forward to today, and we really want to access that, but so do others. You rightly point out that once there's a recognizable use, there's a market, there's a price. One of the major cement companies has recently qualified RCP as a material that can be added into concrete mixes to offset the amount of new cement. It's limited to only a small proportion, but that has created a market. So from a business perspective, we need to very carefully monitor the economics of supply and demand as that market evolves. But we've tried to be realistic. Again, as a funder, I looked at a lot of circular economy propositions where the premise was, oh, someone's going to give us this for free, or will even pay us to take this away. And as you point out, as soon as there's a value ascribed to something, it's people start to charge for it. So we've tried to be realistic, and we've built our models around a market price for RCP, and our economics are kind of robust to that. I mean, we would love to get it for free, but I think we need to be realistic.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. And you mentioned earlier that your current commercial partner, Seven, are the only steel producer in the UK that have the exact type of furnace that you need to use. Where else are these furnaces generally located, and their particular markets that you're looking to kind of go into that are, where this technology is already more present?
Yeah, so we're I think thankfully on trend within the steel industry. So there are two main technologies for producing steel. There are blast furnaces, which have a long history, and electric arc furnaces. Blast furnaces are much more carbon intensive, and so the industry is, as it decarbonizes, moving towards electric arc furnaces. So they make up about 30% of steelmaking today, and by 2050 should be over 50%. And you have to look at the recent news in the UK. So Tata Steel recently shut down their blast furnace in Port Talbot, and are replacing it with an electric arc furnace, which will be 3 times larger than the one in Cardiff. So the UK will have significant electric arc furnace capacity in a few years' time. But there are about 500 electric arc furnaces around the world. China makes up a large proportion, but Europe, the US, Middle East all have facilities as well. And I mentioned the benefit of not having to build our own infrastructure, but that comes at a price. We do need to, we can't choose locations. We have to find furnaces that exist today and convince their operators that we're worth working with as a partner.
Yeah. But great, as you said, that it's a kind of a wave that you can ride, right? That seems to be already in motion.
That's right, and it has effectively has 2 benefits for us. So as blast furnaces shut down, there's less of this blast furnace slag I mentioned earlier. The industry knows it as GBBFS, so ground granulated blast furnace slag, which is used in cement. But as that is available in diminishing quantities, the industry is looking for other materials. So in effect, decarbonizing steel has a knock-on effect in cement, because GBFS can have a significant impact in reducing the carbon footprint of concrete mixes. So we're kind of stepping into that breach by finding a way to make electric arc furnace slags a cement replacement.
Yeah, amazing. And how was the fundraising journey? I mentioned in the intro that you successfully raised last year from Zero Carbon Capital as your lead investor. How How did you find that process? Because the last couple of years have been notoriously challenging fundraising.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk us through that, and especially from kind of spinning out from academia, commercializing it, and then taking, what was the narrative there for you?
Yeah, so I have to give a massive amount of recognition to particularly Pippa Gowley at Zero Carbon and Chris Gibbs at Cambridge Enterprise. They really drove our seed round forward. We were really lucky, and I'll say we had actually a really easy time with our seed raise. We put the business plan together in January of 2024. We had cash in the bank in June.
Wow.
Which is lightning
That's
fast.
unheard of. Yeah.
It is. So that was great. We have begun trying to raise Series A, and the market is, I think, much more challenging than it was even 12 months ago. We've got great interactions and ongoing chats with investors, but yeah, the VC landscape is constantly evolving. I think climate tech itself is facing some challenges. Geopolitics, macroeconomics, economics being what they are, and one of our backers, who we would have expected to have cornerstoned our next round, has restructured and are no longer doing investments at this stage. So yeah, we've had our challenges, but I think advice to other founders, operators, the focus is just on execution. So if we continue to drive our product development forward, if we continue to engage with the market and with customers, funding follows, or at least that's the strategy that we've adopted. And we've over the past few months, as some of our commercial relationships have matured, we found that the engagement with investors has become a little bit easier as well.
Okay. And what are the main expectations from investors that you're seeing at this stage? I suppose if there are founders out there at pre-seed, seed, and they want to, look ahead to, well, what it is likely to be expected of me, where is the bar for Series A?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And I've historically, the funds I've raised or been involved in have been, pure financial VCs. And now, interacting more closely with climate tech VCs, it is interesting because they have that double requirement of good financial return, but climate impact, and within climate investors, they'll have their own kind of nuanced view of what impact looks like, or own definition of it. Some look for purely emissions remediation, some for kind of some kind of CO2 calculation somewhere. I have found kind of some of the North American funds, there is a kind of a trope that sort of Americans try to do things, you kind of go big or go home, kind of by extra degrees. And at least one of the funds we were speaking to said, look, we don't know that you're going to make enough of a CO2 impact. We need to see your proposition have the potential for addressing a gigaton of CO2 per year, which is incredibly difficult. To put it in perspective, the aerospace fuel industry doesn't account for a gigaton per year today. It's close, but not quite. So that extra expectation of having outsized impact is challenging. And, to be fair, they want to see that by 2050. And, in 25 years, there's a lot that can be done, and we can make an argument that we could get there. But that's just an extra level of kind of consideration in engaging with some of these investors. We have to admire the ambition, right? But when dealing with climate investors, it's really imperative to be aware of what their impact goals are and to align. And it's a filtering process. You're either aligned with that or you're not. And it's if you're somewhere in between, have a think about whether it's worth trying to point yourself in a direction with that aligns with your own company's goals. But thankfully, as I said, Zero Carbon saw something in us. They're quite an active investor and really have been really helpful in helping to build us relationships with downstream investors. And yeah, fingers crossed that we'll get something over the line this year.
Fantastic. They are a great team. They're such a great team. Yeah. And speaking of team, talk to me about your team and how the team at Reclinker has grown and evolved over these last 3 years, and what's gone well there and perhaps what hasn't.
Yeah, great. So I will say team is incredibly important, particularly at early stage, right? I mean, we're now 11 people. Everyone has a role to play. There's no space to hide. Everyone has to pull their weight, which is exciting, right? If you've got a team that's motivated, it's really really rewarding. We've been really lucky, particularly on our research team, R&D team. It was pretty much ready-made. So the researchers that were in the university have kind of stepped into the company. So some of them are splitting their time. So we've got this kind of part-time resource, and as their grant-funded projects wind down, they'll spend more and more time and eventually be full-time with the company. But we've been the beneficiary of having that kind of ready-made resource. We made a brilliant hire. Our product development manager, Marta, is incredibly bright and has and speaks the language of cement. She spent 5 years at Cemex. She's been at a couple other cement startups. Really understands the product qualification journey, knows the customer base, and when she joined, she said, "Look, I've worked with a lot of technicians in my career. The best technician I've ever worked with is available." And on her endorsement, we hired Ross, who just gets things done. So we've been really pleased. To date, all of our hires have been kind of personal network. But looking forward, once that sort of initial core team, does what it's supposed to do, the challenge is then adding to it. How do you maintain the culture? How do you find the next 5 or 10 hires? And our ambition from our Series A is to grow to about 30 people. So I foresee in, if things go to plan, 2026, 2027, having a large focus on trying to hire people and maintain the culture we've built to date, and particularly hiring people in different geographies. We'd love to have a team, at least a nucleus of a team in the US and in Europe as well.
Yeah, amazing. And yeah, exciting that you still have that part of the journey ahead of you. And you mentioned a little bit there about culture, and I actually saw a post you put on LinkedIn not that long ago, really, about your values as a business. And talk to me about how you went about defining. I mean, did those values evolve quite organically, and you've just codified them, I suppose, into words, or were you very intentional about building those values from the outset? What has that looked like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've worked for some large corporates in my career, and it particularly as a junior employee, it's I sort of kind of, it didn't resonate with me when someone in a far off headquarters dictates these are our corporate values, this is our company culture. So I don't think it works to dictate culture. But I think what we've done, and it's easier to do in small companies, is to, as you say, kind of codify, what do we value as a team, as individuals, what's important to each of us. But we spent the time and we tried to sort of do some exercises where we said, okay, this is a value that's important to us. How would that value manifest itself in different scenarios? So, for instance, conflict resolution. So if we disagree, how are we going to deal with that? And it shouldn't be a surprise. We're almost all from STEM backgrounds. We're quite sort of data driven. So we just, we made the choice to say, okay, fine. When we disagree, let's be respectful of each other's opinions, but let's come to a resolution through data, right? You go find your answer. I'll give someone the space to go and find the information, come back, make an argument. And, so it wasn't, it was organic in the sense that those kind of values came from each of us individually, but we did try to codify it in a way that we can reference those things and say, yeah, as a team, this is what we're, this is how we're going to operate in these cases. So far so good. I'm really, I've been really pleased. I think when everyone's working hard, when everyone's capable, and when we have a mission, being in a mission-driven company kind of helps. So when there's some lows, and there always are lows, to be reminded that we're trying to do something that can potentially have a really, provide a really big benefit globally, kind of helps pick us up a bit.
I really like that piece about, how those values actually look operationally, because I think that's a piece that can often get missed, right? I think the first part of the journey is making sure that the values that you put in place are actually authentic. So looking at who are we and how do we interact, and what do we call that? If we're going to turn this essence into a set of values, what would we call them? But people miss that next step, which is, and what should those values actually look like in action, and how do we make sure that operationally, in our processes and how we work, that we're actually living and breathing these values? Because often, they say, oh, one of our values is that we're really innovative, but we're doing everything on an Excel spreadsheet. Like it can really
exactly. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. I really like that. Perfect. So there's been like lots of good news in the last 6 months. I've seen coming out, right, from Reclinker. So accelerators that you've been on, the fundraise, listed on lots of one to watch lists.
Yeah.
What are you and the team particularly proud of?
Yeah, that's a good one. Like I'd say we're particularly proud of just being in an ecosystem that celebrates things that we're doing. And you're right. We've won lots of awards. We've got lots of recognition in the last year. Next year there'll be another company that wins those same awards. And I think we're proud of just being in that funnel, in that mix. And I heard a phrase once that I really like. You get what you celebrate. And I think being in a community that celebrates innovation, but also celebrates climate, kind of aspirations towards making the world a better place, that's been really rewarding. And I think the plaques on the wall are nice, but it's just standing shoulder to shoulder with some of the other award recipients, looking around, saying, look, we're all trying to do something that's going to improve the human environment, improve the air we breathe. So I think it's that aspect that stands out.
Love that. Yeah, it's such a collaborative space generally, right? The climate space in the UK, but yeah, particularly it sounds the ecosystem that you have built around yourselves as well, particularly is positive. And what are the plans for the next 12 months? You mentioned the Series A raise, and I imagine a lot of those plans are probably going to hinge on that. But yeah, what are the key challenges that lie ahead for you, and what should we all be watching out for as you build and grow?
Yeah, so we're at a really exciting time. The hockey stick aspirations, as it were. So we are at the point of mapping out pilot production trials with Seven. Our aspiration is to be in production in 2026, and that's going to bring with it a whole set of challenges, but should move us to operating on on the next level. And really, as a reformed VC, I take a step back and look at everything in terms of value creation. When I was starting out as my first go as a CEO, a kind of someone as a former CEO of a startup in his late career asked me, what is the job of a CEO? What's your role? And I waffled. I said something like, strategic, guidance and resources, blah blah blah. And he said, no, it's really, really simple. It's create shareholder value. If you do that, if you create shareholder value, you will not worry about your job, and you'll be fine. If you do anything else, you're in trouble. And so, taking a step back, how are we going to create value? How are we going to make our business bigger and bigger, more and more valuable to the world? So our milestones have been pretty clear from our seed round, and that was get to the point of production, and have the commercial arrangements and the supply chain to support that. So we've executed on that. We're not entirely to the end of those milestones, but we're close. But looking forward, our Series A milestones are to get into steady state production, and then to replicate what we're doing in Cardiff somewhere else, to show not only that it can be done, but that we can repeat it. And if we can do that, then looking down the road to a Series B, that value creation journey is do it once, recreate it, and then show it can be done N times. And that should lift us to greater and greater valuations, easier and easier fundraising in theory. So the next 12 months will be focused on getting into production, certifying our products, getting things out to market, but then landing in that next geography and kind of recreating what we've done here in terms of sourcing recovered cement, and building a partnership and all the kind of commercial arrangements with another steelmaker.
Yeah, amazing. And what would be the biggest help to you in the biggest accelerator to you in driving that journey forward? Would it be regulatory change? Would it be, I don't know, industry like adoption? What investors? What's the biggest help to you, I guess, in this next 6 months?
So cash is obviously helpful. Regulation is both a good and bad thing. I've seen industries that have suffered. So we don't want to be propelled by regulation, but particularly in certain geographies, if the kind of focus on decarbonization is emphasized, we've been kind of pleasantly surprised that in our conversations with US steelmakers, that there seems to be a real appetite for finding means to decarbonize, and that's despite a lessening, a reduced emphasis on that politically in the US. So I think, a kind of a real authentic desire within steel and cement to decarbonize. That would be the biggest thing to help us. There are claims of kind of greenwashing and kind of ESG kind of window dressing across a lot of large industries. Thankfully, we've been lucky to connect to some companies that are really willing to put their resources behind decarbonization. Again, calling on Seven, but it would be really challenging for us if the steel and cement companies of the world decided, look, there's really no economic, there's no incentive for us to change business as usual.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's not essential and you don't want to be dependent on it, but it could help.
It could
move the needle faster on something that's already going in the right direction.
Yes, and we do see so the carbon border adjustment mechanisms that'll come into play next year will impact steel and cement in Europe, and we think that'll kind of focus minds a bit. But I think our proposition, again, we've tried to be robust to price fluctuations in our supply chain, but also to the regulatory landscape. And we've built a model that suggests that we could produce cement at about the same price as conventional cement, and with that carbon benefit. So we're hoping that a market will be willing to pay a green premium. Even if they're not, we think our product will have a compelling case for being low carbon and allowing companies just to maintain business as usual.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I wish you the best of luck with it. It's a really exciting proposition, and one that I'll be watching very keenly over the next 6 to 12 months. Have you got any final recommendations of resources, collaborators, enablers, networks, accelerators that have been particularly valuable to you on your journey that you would recommend other founders go and check out?
So recommendations, team's really important. If you're going to start a company, be really careful about the people you partner with as a team. There's I've read somewhere that the average time to exit for a deep tech company in the UK is about 14 years.
Wow.
The average length of a marriage in the UK is 11. So you may have a longer relationship with your co-founders than you have with a spouse. And so, take a long, hard look. Are these people that I can envision myself, working with 10 years down the line? How do we resolve conflicts? How do we, support each other when things are good and bad? And then, just be really careful about how much money you raise and from whom. Investors have their own agendas. You may equally be on a board with a funder for 10 plus years. So are these people that you trust their motivations? Have you been honest with each other about what success would look like? Are you aligned in those things? That's all really important. So, do that sort of thought exercise. If we're successful in 10 years, what does this look like? How do we all win? If things go badly wrong, how are we going to kind of pick up the pieces? But there are a lot of resources out there. The UK is a much, much better place for starting a company than it was 20 years ago. My first taste of venture capital was raising money for a startup in the Cambridge Science Park in 2002. And there were really only a handful of venture funds around at that point. So the ecosystem here has matured incredibly. There are loads of accelerators. There are loads of mentorship programs. Cambridge is a wonderful place, and I have to give a shout out to the kind of Cambridge ecosystem in general, where people are more than willing to give advice. Be careful who you take advice from as well. But I think most people in the startup world, and particularly in the climate impact startup world, are willing to sit down and have a coffee and share learnings, for better for worse. So I hope anybody who's thinking about starting the journey has the courage to knock on some doors and pick up some wisdom from some old dogs who've been around the block a few times.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Phil. That's been really, really useful. Thank you for sharing your journey, those learnings, and the advice with any founders that are listening today.
Yep.
And best of luck to you and the rest of the team on the onward journey.